I think as my mum used to say to me, to thine own self be true. And I think basically these days, what I always keep in mind is to be sincere. I think if you're sincere in your actions and beliefs, then you can't go far wrong.
Hello, I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spike Pit. In this episode today, we have got a bunch of call-ins from the listeners, the brave folk who have decided to pluck up courage and phone into the pit. Also, news on the latest patrons to the Spike Pit, which is awesome. Had a little flourish of activity there, and I want to give some shouts out. Then, mostly though, it's feedback and continuing the discussion around topics that have cropped up previously on earlier episodes. Sage words of wisdom at the top of the show from Goblin's Henchman, and now with some feedback on our interview, it's Joe Salvador of Raven God Games.
Hi Colin, this is Joe. Just catching up on some podcasts after a few weeks of listening to audiobooks. And, I heard the responses to our interview, and I just want to say thanks to everybody that called in. Thanks for your kind words. I had a good time with the interview. I think you did a good job, man. Don't get down on yourself. I'm not the biggest extrovert in the world, so I think you did a great job just making me feel comfortable and, putting everything together. And I appreciate it, man. Something that Carl said I thought was really interesting and astute. Yes, the Ash D6 resolution mechanic definitely informed what I did with Eldritch Tales. It fit directly into White Box, really without any kind of modification. And all I did was, expand it to include the mental attributes. Yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to say was that all the support for designer notes, man, I think that's a great idea. I think I'm going to go ahead and do it and go forward with producing a PDF to put out for Reaver, hoping that it will let people know where I'm coming from and what my goals with the game are. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So, anywho, thanks again. Cheers, brother.
It's been a popular interview, had some great feedback, really enjoyed doing it. I've got to say, I need to pull my finger out and try and do some more interviews. I've said it before, I don't think I'm the best interviewer. I do enjoy it, and you're only ever going to get better by practicing. And from the feedback that I've received, people enjoy hearing multiple voices on the episodes, so I'll see what I can do. Arrange some other interviews perhaps. I'm going to give it some thought. As I've said previously, October has been a washout for gardening. It's given me a bit of time to catch up on a few projects, and one of those is getting familiarised with Audacity. I spoke a little while ago about going through the back catalogue, taking down some old episodes, combining them together, making these compilations, and just trying to kind of improve my audio chops a little bit. I get a kind of enjoyment out of editing and a kind of satisfaction with the finished product. And when you're doing something creative like this, personally, I want to feel like I'm improving. It's not always popular, and I got a little bit of pushback previously on taking down old episodes, but now we've got some call-ins from folks who are kind of perhaps a little bit more sympathetic, shall we say. It's awesome to hear their thoughts, and there's quite a range of ideas represented across the following call-ins. So thanks, guys.
I think going through the back catalog is a great idea. I don't have nearly the legacy of episodes that you have, but I did take a little short journey through the first couple of episodes of mine, and wow, what a revelation. They really serve as a diary of our thoughts. It's worth going back and listening to them and comparing ourselves then to ourselves today. And I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to even go back and maybe bring some of those old ideas forward again.
I hear what you're saying about the early episodes, and I totally understand. Some of my early episodes, I have been thinking about going back and downloading the audio and pulling them off Anchor and stuff like that. Just especially the early overviews, I feel like they were not up to the kind of level of where I want my content to be in terms of kind of knowledgeable about the games that I'm talking about. But also just generally, I feel like there's a lot of sort of stuff that has changed with the way I do my podcast and the way that I think about a lot of things, and that maybe it's better to have sort of like a curated back catalog rather than an everything.
I think the Mr. Turn Compendium was great, and it really showed the critical mass that you can have in our anchored debates. And so it makes me think, I wonder if then these smaller episodes are a kind of working document, and then you're able to draw it all together for a bigger thing. And I think it kind of potentially ups the game because it raises your awareness that whilst it might get aired once first, it will also contribute to a bigger thing that really carries some momentum.
Like I said then, a great selection of ideas. Frank talking about this thing that happens quite often is returning to old discussions. And listening to the old episodes as I'm going through editing really does bring new ideas to mind, and as I put the episodes and the remixes together, I will try and work in some of that new content as well. My most recent one has been There and Back Again, Ray Otis's game set in Middle-earth. Talking of Middle-earth, we got a call in there from Arlen, who's been talking about Middle-earth on his podcast, live from Pellam's Wasteland. And Arlen is one of the most recent folk to join the pit crew. So big thanks to Arlen for that, and welcome him aboard. And I think Arlen really gets to the root of the problem. It's when you move on and you no longer feel happy with something you've done, it's super difficult to just leave it and not go back and tinker with it. In fact, Tolkien himself was pretty famous for doing just that. And I think what Barney was talking about is interesting, this idea that you perhaps make a call in expecting it to be this almost fleeting episode that just goes away, but really it's residing somewhere in a back catalogue. And if you draw these episodes together, you end up with this compendium almost for posterity. Perhaps one day people will look back and there'll be an anchorite month, perhaps in August, where people listen to old recordings put out by the anchorites back in the 2020s.
Just chipping on Mr. Turn episode, I remember making a big mistake when I first started DMing of teleporting a PC out of the dungeon right at the beginning, and that player missed pretty much the whole session. I think there's a big difference between miss a turn and miss a whole session. I also wonder whether some of this miss a turn versus basically relates to who the game was targeted at the beginning. It was about kids, wasn't it, at the beginning? Probably not grown-ups with busy lives. So if you missed a bit of a session, there was another one round the corner. It wasn't maybe such a big deal, but you're right. If you've got 2 weeks between games, you got a job and you missed the whole session, well, that's probably unfortunate, isn't it? So I think missing a turn is okay. Missing an session is not so good. I also think that miss a turn can be okay. I understand why you're saying it. Is it good game design? But I think there can be some benefits to it if used right. If it's part of your game, then players know they have to be ready, maybe adapt for these kind of scenarios. But also, I think you can have a way of, I don't think sometimes it can be easy to think it's about a player missing out, but is it basically enhanced the experience for some other players, because basically they've got the pressure on them now. There's only 3 of them versus the Ogre Magi versus all 5 of them, and as long as that spotlight moves around such that someone else sometimes has more of the attention than just the whole group, and sometimes maybe it's a way of bringing out the player that doesn't get a chance sometimes because the dominant players been sleeped. Anyway, so I think there can be some benefits too. Just a conclusion, Colin. I think it's a fair point what you raise. A lot of anchorites are probably in the DM zone, and it can be quite a different experience as the DM versus a player. I recently was rolling up some characters using some of the things that came up, and I started thinking that some of the things I wrote about these specific character generation ways felt a bit harsh as a player. With the DM, maybe these things feel you don't notice some of the rougher points, because as you say, the DM is always in the game.
I guess I really blew it when I brought this subject up and muddied the waters by calling it a miss a turn mechanism, when really it's all about player engagement and moving around the spotlight and things like that. I guess it was just on my mind, and I've been really happy with the response. Ended up putting it all together in this kind of big medley episode, so hope people in the future will listen and perhaps chuckle to themselves, who knows. But big thanks to Goblin's Henchman for his comments on the subject. Got a call in from one of the recent members to the pit crew. It's Josh B for Beckelhimer, and he picked up on episode 205 where we've been talking about anxiety and running games.
Episode 205, I think the Pregame Anxiety one. I listened to that episode, and I still struggle with anxiety and depression, which could be why I just don't run games like I want to, or even why I tend to be avoiding the spotlight as a player. So, I avoid the spotlight until it's shined on me from the GM or another player. And it's difficult, really difficult to do. Handle that anxiety, because some days are a lot worse than others, and some days it's not bad, but it's still there. I mean, I even have problems with performing in front of people that I'm close with, like friends and family. Even though I'm close to them and know them well and they know me, I just struggle with just performing in front of people. Though what's funny is, now that we're in this whole pandemic and I wear my mask everywhere I go, I feel a lot more comfortable and more confident with my mask. So I wonder how it would go if I show up to a gaming table and I have a mask on. I bet I would do a lot better with my mask, because it gives me some kind of, security. It's crazy how a year has passed and pretty much the same thing, and pretty much the same reason of my comments of why I don't use map, because I can make up things quicker than I can stumbling and acting like I don't know what I'm doing, trying to look at, a map and a module.
I've strung a few call-ins together now where folk have referred to recent topics that I've discussed. First couple of call-ins from Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast and John Larger Red Dice Diaries. They're talking about this business of pitching your game, how you pitch your game, how you make your intentions clear. Perhaps it's a little bit of almost initial expectation management, and we all know how important it is to manage the expectations of your players and the group to avoid disappointment later on. People's time is very valuable, and you don't want disgruntled players in your game. Being clear about what you intend to do and the kind of perhaps themes and topics that might crop up in the game could save a lot of aggravation down the line. Following on from that, there's a call from Josh, and he's picking up on this idea I floated out there about using slides. Turns out a few people are already using slides in their games, and I've got to confess I've not really progressed that any further. I'm just struggling on with my 5e game on Duo, and to be fair, I do my best with online gaming, but it's getting to the point that I really do miss my face-to-face games it's just so much easier. In fact, talking to my group, I think one of the things I struggle with online gaming is it feels a little bit more taxing. My senses are seeming to try a bit harder. I'm looking at the screen, trying to read stuff, visual cues. I'm trying to listen harder. I feel like I'm naturally speaking up a bit more because you're not sure how clear you're coming across. It's just a bit more draining. So the way I've been dealing with that is the shorter session, and that has problems of its own. Anyway, let's get to those call-ins.
Hearing Liren and Jeff's proposal, which I think is straightforward and makes a lot of sense, I think that's a great way to pitch a game, 100%. I think when you pitch a game online, that's a great way to do it. I also think, it'll get covered in Session 0 to some degree in side chatter. I don't think you could label RPG systems like that, right? So I don't think you could use that kind of label on D&D 5e. But if you're offering a D&D 5e game, I think you could fill in all those things Jeff was talking about. Coming up with a semi-standardized format on how you pitch games when you post them looking for players wouldn't be a bad thing. I think that would actually be very helpful in helping people look around.
I've pretty much got to agree with Jason's calling with regards to Liren's idea of putting like a sort of markers to say, like what age range games are for, what the complexity's for. Now, I think the reason it works for board games is because they have set rules. There's only like really certain ways you can play a board game. That's not to throw any shade on board games. I've no problems with them. They have sort of like rules that you can point to and you follow those rules, and that's how the game works out. So it's, in my opinion, a bit easier to say like, yes, this is suitable for certain ages. Yes, this is certain groups. Here's the complexity level, etc. Whereas I think because RPGs are a lot more sort of creative and open to interpretation, I think it'd be a lot more difficult to do that. I mean, yeah, there's certain objective things you could point to, like this game uses dice. Even that, I mean, look at like the pre-dice days when they used to use chits drawn out of a bag, and you don't really need a dice. All you need is like some sort of random element, whether that be cards, tokens, whatever. I think it would be very difficult to have an age rating or whatever sort of rating without it being sort of pretty generic and therefore not really that useful. Don't get me wrong, I think the idea potentially has some merit. I think it'd be a very difficult thing to implement, and you'd probably have to get some of the big movers and shakers in the industry to go along with it. To be honest, I don't really see that happening. I mean, looking at how unified the hobby is and how much we all agree on terminology. I've heard Joe from Hindsightless talking about reviews, and I've got to admit, although I don't do as many YouTube reviews as I used to give sort of like ratings in various categories to different books. And then the more I've sort of gone along is I'm like, these ratings, they don't really mean anything to anyone. If I sort of say, oh, the layout's a 3 out of 5 in this book, that only really means something to me unless I go to exhaustive measures to explain that to other people. So now when I do reviews, I tend to just do like flick throughs and just talk about what I think about the books, don't give them the rating, and I hope people would still get an idea of whether or not they want to buy a book.
So Google Slides, I think, would be a good substitute for the whole, printing out pages as the handouts. Because I know a lot of those older modules, they'll have like artwork or handouts that'll be like, show them this image when they enter the room. And so even if you're doing a theater of the mind game and you just got a laptop there with, Google Slides, you can push the next button or whatever to show them this is what you see when you enter the room. Because really sometimes it's hard to describe in words what you could easily see with a photo. And I think having photos of scenery, crazy things like magical doors, or even just horrible monsters will definitely spark the imagination.
One of my recent retread remixes I entitled Seeing in the Dark, and it brought together a discussion that I had way back around episode 10, 11 through to 15, 16, something like that. It takes quite a lot of time to bring all this stuff together, but I was reasonably happy with the result, and it's the sort of thing I thought would be a good candidate to post up on MeWe or social media for a group of fans of a game. In particular, I posted that one up on the Dungeons and Dragons MeWe site. I thought a few people might like that, and it might bring the podcast to the attention of some different listeners. folk that are perhaps outside of the anchorite community. And it would seem that some of my more regular listeners like Jason and Josh B have listened into the remix. And Jason, interestingly enough, touches on the burning oil, which was another discussion that rambled on over a good number of episodes, and we'll probably end up getting the retread treatment, pulling some pretty amusing call-ins together around that topic. So watch this space. These episodes understandably don't get the same amount of listens, I guess because regular folk have heard it all before. But thanks for these call-ins, guys, and perhaps I'll try and work some of this into the remix.
So since we're talking about low light vision again, you know, if you go to something like Hackmaster 5e, the current version of Hackmaster, it's low light vision. So, you know, if there's some kind of light, they can see better. But if it's total darkness, they can't see. The other reason you should look at Hackmaster, Callin, is, I'll read you this. Lamp oil. This is a relatively inexpensive vegetable oil, typically olive, not kerosene. It does not burn at room temperature and is only mildly flammable when heated, as occurs when drawing up a wick towards an open flame. Dousing the opponent with lamp oil will not subsequently allow them to be set aflame, nor is it possible to use lamp oil as a Molotov cocktail or a petrol bomb. So it sounds like you may want to look at Hackmaster because it fixes a lot of the problems you have with these other games. So I'd recommend you look at that. I just figured you're listing the way all these different systems are handling infravision, low light vision on, and you decide to skip right over Hackmaster. I would go and fill that in, and in case you redo the oil thing, I've already given you the answer for that for Hackmaster. So hopefully that gives you something useful. If not, then, you know, just delete it and don't worry about it.
So, infravision, I view it strictly as heat vision, meaning, you know, the elf isn't going to be able to read their spell book or scrolls, and the dwarf isn't going to be able to detect traps in natural caves or whatever that ability is for OSE or BX. It's strictly just a way to see heat vision. And I mean, I imagine it being used where maybe a dwarf or elf kind of takes the lead with no light, and they can detect if things are in front of them. And then, okay, all is clear. And then they light up torches. Next thing you know, there's like 12 skeletons in front of them because, you know, they're undead. They're not going to see them. Or maybe the dwarf is taking the lead and he walks right into a gelatinous cube. Again, no heat sources on those things. So it's definitely a dangerous thing.
In the games I run, I would say that dark vision or its various different versions is one of the things that is most often forgotten about, as are tracking light sources and similar resources. It does rob the game of some of the atmosphere, I feel, if you do overlook this stuff. Maybe this is where the likes of your Roll20 and virtual tabletops gains a little bit of ground on traditional methods, but I don't know. I've tried a few things in the past, like little standees with a picture of a torch on or a picture of a lantern and stand it in front of the player, so I'm not repeatedly asking who's got what in the way of a light source. And DM Ricky has even gone to the lengths of using a little, I don't know, kind of a patio lantern, a candle holder or something like that, and whoever's carrying a light source has one of them sat in front of them like a little prop. Totally over the top, but kind of fun and enjoyable, and it particularly kind of amused the younger players. As for Hackmaster, I mean, I'd love to give it a try like I would in the other game that Jason talks about. I'd like to try, but Barbarians of Lamura. In terms of realistically going away and checking them out myself, it seems unlikely at present because there's just so much out there, and I say it all the time, there's so many games and just not enough time to give them all the attention that they deserve. And I don't just want a pile of stuff building up in the background. That's one of them things I believe Andy Goodman of Expedition to the Grizzly Peaks was talking about recently. Those books on shelves, I hate it. They feel like missed opportunities. So I want to give some shout outs now to the new members of the pit crew. I'd mentioned at the start of the show that I'd enjoyed a flurry of activity recently, and it is super encouraging. These are the guys that really do kind of give me that support and encouragement, and it's sort of a validation in some ways. I know it sounds a little bit lame, but if I'm not recording and putting effort into my podcast, I feel like these are the guys in particular that I'm letting down. So I want to say a big thanks to Arlen Walker, Josh Beckelhimer, Eric Salzwedel, Edwin King and Cody Marza. Thanks guys for your generous support and encouragement.
I missed your message about my gardening D&D inquiry. So just as an update, the players, while they were in doing their day job down the dungeon, hired some hirelings to get on with the path. And when the players had come back from their delve, the hirelings had completed the work, including backfilling the removed concrete slab. Now, the hirelings did forswear on their oath that they did remove all said hardcore, but unfortunately the PCs were full out of detect lie spells. I think subsequent work with said hirelings have indicated that maybe their alignment strays from more from the lawful to the chaotic. We can't be certain of their word, and we're just hopeful that their oath lies more in the chaotic good than the chaotic evil.
And that, as they say, is a wrap. Thanks to everybody who called in, making this Into the Pit episode possible. Massive thanks to the pit crew, my patrons over on Spike Pit Patreon. And last but not least, a big thanks goes out to you, the listener, for taking a bit of time out of your day to listen to old Spike Pit. Take care, and I'll catch you later.
Anyway, good stuff. Peace out.